we are back for Overanalyzing House of the Dragon, with part 27 of how Rhaenyra's Blacks faced off against Aegon's Greens. Forces have long been trying to keep Rhaenys, Daemon, and Rhaenyra off the throne. But through children and marriages, the three of them have allied themselves against the children of Alicent Hightower. And now both sides, the Greens and the Blacks, seem to wait, as Viserys gets sicker and sicker. This will be the last entry on how things led to the Dance of the Dragons, as we have come to the eve of the war. Viserys is dying, and in part 28 we'll move on to the actual dance. But let's first go over the last paragraphs of Heirs of the Dragon, which is based on the Rogue Prince. Perforce, we ought to look at the members of that small council on the eve of the great events of 129 AC, for they were to play a large role in all that followed. The king's hand remained Sir Otto Hightower, father of the Queen and uncle to the Lord of Oldtown. Grand Maester Orwyle was the newest member of the council, and was thought to favour neither Blacks nor Greens. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard remained Sir Criston Cole, however, and in him Rhaenyra had a bitter foe. The aged Lord Lyman Beesbury was Master of Coin, in which capacity he had served almost uninterrupted since the old king's day. The youngest councillors were the Lord Admiral and Master of Ships Sir Tywin Lannister, brother to the Lord of Casterly Rock, and the Lord Confessor and Master of Whisperers, Larry Strong, Lord of Harrenhal. Lord Jasper Wilde, Master of Laws, known amongst the small folk as Ironrod, completed the council. Lord Wilde's unbending attitudes on matters of law earned him his sobriquet, Septon Eustace says, but Mushroom declares that Ironrod was named for the stiffness of his member, having sired 29 children on 4 wives before the last one died of exhaustion. And so next we get an added paragraph and some that were not in the original Rogue Prince, and is actually just mostly padding. This listing of the small council, in essentially the same order, is repeated again just 3 pages later in Fire and Blood, as we get into the material from The Princess and the Queen. George R. Martin just copied the section from later on and pasted it back here with some minimal editing. And there really is not much reason for it to be here other than to fill pages. As I said before, the latter third of Viserys' reign is very light on material, and so George R. Martin was trying to add more here, it seems. The final third of Viserys' reign is only 5 pages, and of that, the Maester Mess gets half a page, this relisting of the small council gets half a page, and artwork gets half a page. By the way, for a little history on why the Rogue Prince falls apart near the end, it might be because George R. Martin was given relatively little time to prepare the piece for Rogues, and Rogue's release date was moved up as well. George R. Martin had said at the time that the Rogue Prince that was published in Rogues was really an abridged version. In fact, he said that many times over the years, perhaps recognizing that Viserys' late reign was incomplete. But in the end, when Fire and Blood finally came out, very little was actually added. Just a few sentences here and there, the dealing with the Maester Mess, and this repetition of the small council from The Princess and the Queen. The Rogue Prince is about 13,000 words, the Fire and Blood equivalent is 13,800. Now going through this list, we of course have Otto Hightower, but added here is recognition that he is uncle of the Lord of Oldtown, Ormond Hightower. Previously in the story, Otto was the brother to the Lord of Oldtown, though that was over 20 years ago. This means that the brother has died, and now Otto's nephew, Ormond, rules. Ormond is later a character in The Princess and the Queen. We have little idea when Otto's brother actually died. We then hear about Grand Maester Orwyle, and we get a rather obvious lie that Orwyle was seen to favor neither Blacks nor Greens. As we go on into the story, we will learn quite a bit more about Orwyle. He lives an exceptionally crazy life, and is one of the main sources on the Dance of the Dragons, along with Mushroom and Septon Eustace, but he definitely had his biases. Then we get Sir Criston Cole, and a reminder that he's a bitter foe of Rhaenyra, holding a grudge for 15 years. And then we get to Lyman Beesbury. Now in the original Princess and the Queen, it was established that Lyman Beesbury, the Master of Coin, was very old, 80 years old, though we previously didn't know when he was added to the small council, and so here we find out that he's actually been there the whole time, since the days of Jaehaerys, which is odd for 2 reasons. First, it was already established in the Rogue Prince that Daemon was Master of Coin from 103 to 104. Now the paragraph does say that Lyman served almost uninterrupted, not uninterrupted, so it doesn't contradict things, but it does leave us wondering what Lyman Beesbury did for the 2 years that Daemon was Master of Coin. Also, it's interesting that Lyman is later the sole black supporter on the small council, considering Daemon stole his job briefly. Unlike others, it seems that Lyman doesn't hold a grudge. One would expect the Beesburys to be green supporters as their bannermen to House Hightower, but House Hightower had a number of unruly bannermen during the dance, including House Beesbury, Costain, and Mullendore. The second thing about Lyman Beesbury is that he served under Jaehaerys, and Jaehaerys had a very serious problem with a Braxton the Stinger Beesbury, who along with 2 other men supposedly slept with the king's daughter, Sarah Targaryen. Now, we don't exactly know why, but Braxton was singled out. The other 2 men were offered marriages as punishment, with one choosing exile, but Braxton was ordered to be mutilated. His tongue, nose, and genitalia removed, and all of his limbs broken and forced to heal wrong. Rather than face that fate, Braxton asked for a trial by combat and was killed by the king himself, who stabbed him through the face. So it goes without saying that, for whatever reason, Jaehaerys really hated Braxton the Stinger Beesbury. And yet, around the time of this duel, Lyman Beesbury was made Master of Coin. Now, we don't know the family tree, but Lyman was probably Braxton's uncle and became heir of Honeyhold after Braxton's death. And so it's a little odd that Jaehaerys would choose to have the kin of Braxton the Stinger Beesbury around. Who knows what's going on? Perhaps Lyman was essentially a hostage to keep Lord Beesbury in line after the death of his son Braxton. We don't know. We then hear about Tywin Lannister being on the council as Master of Ships. Tywin appeared once before as a would-be suitor for Rhaenyra. Of course, the significance of Tywin being there is that his twin brother is Jason, the Lord of Casterly Rock, and so any conspiracy to put Aegon on the throne ahead of Rhaenyra comes with the support of a Lannister army. We do know that the Lannisters voted against Rhaenys and the Velaryons at the Great Council of 101 and for Viserys. The Lannisters even brought an army to the council to enforce the results. So it seems that the Lannisters, for whatever reason, would be against female rule or Velaryon rule and are willing to fight for it. In a sense, the Lannisters are just repeating their actions at the Council of 101 in the Dance of the Dragons. Tywin was only a child at the time of the council, but his later appointment by Viserys may have been a reward to the Lannisters for their loyalty to him. We then hear about Lord Confessor and Master of Whisperers, Larry Strong. Now, we actually hear very little about Larry Strong during the reign of Viserys. He was a confessor back in 105, was accused of murder by some, and then ends up as Lord Confessor and Master of Whisperers at some time. We're not sure when, at least before Orwyle joins the small council. It's uncertain what allowed him to rise to his position, or why he was seen as good at his job. The only rumor or gossip that makes it to the king that seems relevant to the story is the Heir for a Day incident, way back in 105. It may have been that, with Harwin feeding Larys the information, but we don't know. And finally, we get some information on Jasper Wilde. Now, surprisingly, Jasper Wilde is actually not much of a character during the Dance of the Dragons or before it. He makes some arguments during the original coup, gives some military advice to Aemond and is ignored, and then is executed by Rhaenyra. But in his brief appearances, he does come off as an uncompromising and cruel type. So this added information from Eustace does seem to fit his character. Whether he actually had 29 children with 4 wives, as Mushroom claims, is unknown. Gildayn doesn't dispute it, but it does seem hard to believe. 29 trueborn children is actually the same number of children that Walder Frey had, but of course he's an old man in his 90s. Jasper Wilde is never described as old. Of course, it's always possible that he had a child a year every year since he was 18, but it all seems like a Mushroom exaggeration. As the Seven Kingdoms welcomed the 129th year after Aegon's conquest with bonfires, feasts, and bacchanals, King Viserys I Targaryen was growing ever weaker. His chest pains had grown so severe that he could no longer climb a flight of steps and had to be carried about the Red Keep in a chair. By the second moon of the year, His Grace had lost all appetite and was ruling the realm from his bed, when he felt strong enough to rule at all. Most days, he preferred to leave matters of state to his hand, Sir Otto Hightower. On Dragonstone, meanwhile, Princess Rhaenyra was once again great with child. She took to her bed. And so next we come to the final months of Viserys' reign. The new year comes with bonfires, feasts, and bacchanals. Bacchanals, by the way, are drunken orgies. I'm not sure why exactly Gildain is choosing to write about the Seven Kingdoms in this way, but a common literary trope is to portray the world as depraved and corrupt before a disaster. That way society can be swept away and begin anew. Sodom and Gomorrah, Noah's Ark, the depravity of Rome before the barbarians burned it down. We are near the dance, and so society needs to be portrayed as something that needs to be cleansed. Even though, in practice, these partiers have nothing to do with why the Dance of the Dragons is happening. They are victims. So anyway, we find that Viserys is so sick he cannot walk, and so Otto essentially rules, the implication that Otto had plenty of time to scheme and prepare for Viserys' death. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra is pregnant with her 6th child and about to give birth. Interestingly, a line has been removed here in Fire and Blood that was in the original Rogue Prince. The final line of this paragraph in the Rogue Prince was, "She took to her bed, with her husband the Rogue Prince ever at her side." As the name of this story was originally the Rogue Prince, it would be of course noteworthy where Daemon Targaryen would be at story's end. But the line was removed. I guess George R. Martin didn't want Daemon to appear loyal, or perhaps George R. Martin decided Daemon being there didn't fit so well with the later mushroom story that Rhaenyra was shrieking and screaming during childbirth. It's hard to say. Whatever the case, Daemon Targaryen is largely absent now from a story that was originally about him. He was last seen 2 years earlier thanking Otto for his service, and a year before that beheading Vaemond Velaryon for Rhaenyra. On the 3rd day of the 3rd moon of 129 AC, Princess Helaena brought her 3 children to visit the king in his chambers. The twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, were 6 years old. Their brother Maelor, only 2. His Grace gave the babe a pearl ring off his finger to play with, and told the twins the story of how their great-great-grandsire and namesake Jaehaerys had flown his dragon north to the Wall to defeat a vast host of wildlings, giants, and wargs. Though the children had heard the story a dozen times before, they listened attentively. And so here we have the final moments of Viserys. He gives Maelor a pearl ring to play with, which isn't significant as far as I can tell, and then tells a crazy story about Jaehaerys flying north of the Wall to defeat a vast host of wildlings, giants, and wargs. Now, this is an odd tale, as nowhere else do we hear about any war between Jaehaerys and the wildlings. Here the story is Jaehaerys versus wildlings, giants, and wargs. In the world of Ice and Fire, it's both Jaehaerys and Alysanne against wildlings, giants, and mammoths. According to Elio Garcia, he asked George R. Martin specifically what the deal was with this story when writing the world of Ice and Fire, and George R. Martin said it was simply a tall tale Viserys made up for the kids. That's all. I guess all the real stories about Targaryens involve them fighting each other or burning down the kingdom, and so Viserys had to make up a story. There is one small change between this paragraph in The Rogue Prince and here in Fire and Blood. Here the children have heard the story a dozen times before, making it seem like tall tales with Grandpa was a regular thing for the kids. Afterward, the king sent them away, pleading weariness and a tightness in his chest. Then Viserys of House Targaryen, the first of his name, king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm, closed his eyes and went to sleep. He never woke. He was 52 years old, and had reigned over most of Westeros for 26 years. Then the storm broke, and the dragons danced. And so here Viserys sends everyone away, complaining about being tired and a tightness in his chest, and then proceeds to die, thus ending the Heirs of the Dragon chapter and the Rogue Prince. Of course, Viserys was only 52, pointing to some serious medical issue, likely lead poisoning, either accidental or intentional. On a side note, the ending appears to be somewhat based on some texts from the King's Prize chapter in A Dance with Dragons. There's some similarities which kind of points to our author using it as a skeleton, but that's neither here nor there. Now there are a couple of things that are different from the Fire and Blood version and the Rogue Prince version. The tightness in Viserys' chest was added, which shifts the tone of the paragraph a bit. Viserys' death may have been a little more violent, perhaps a heart attack. Not to mention, there may have been a bit of negligence. Why was no one sent to manage the king after tightness in his chest? Now that final line has been changed a little bit from the Rogue Prince. The original line was, "After this, the storm broke, and the dragons danced and died." It's been changed to, "Then the storm broke, and the dragons danced." A little shorter and a little smoother. But the biggest change is there was actually another sentence in between the "after the storm broke" line and Viserys reigning for 26 years. It was, "The tale of Prince Daemon Targaryen's bold deeds, black crimes, and heroic death in the carnage that followed are well known to all, so we shall end our story here." And so this line really centers the story around Daemon, and with its removal, he is really missing in action for a bit of time. Now, the line was deleted, but it's interesting that Daemon is described as performing bold deeds, black crimes, and having a heroic death. The thing is, Daemon doesn't actually do a great number of things during the war. The heroic death is obviously the battle over the God's Eye. But what are the black crimes? The only thing that really sticks out is the blood and cheese incident, which is something we're not sure he even did. And then we have the bold deeds. But Daemon wasn't actually that bold in anything during the war, except with his death. There was his bloodless conquest of Harrenhal, but that wasn't exactly bold. He just flew his dragon on top of the castle as ordered, and they surrendered. And then Daemon led a fairly standard campaign to conquer the Riverlands, and then retreated out of the Riverlands with no big surprises. And then he searched for Aemond, as ordered. There really weren't any bold deeds, unless one counts possibly having an affair with Nettles. And so, besides his death, we find that other than rumors, Daemon didn't really have any bold deeds or black crimes. But I suppose it largely doesn't matter, as the line was deleted. And this brings us to the end of the 51-page Heirs of the Dragon, and all material based on the Rogue Prince. Next time we will continue on into the next chapter in Fire and Blood, Dying of the Dragons, the Blacks and the Greens, which is material based largely on the Princess and the Queen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.